You are in a KOF 15 match, and you get a knockdown. Then you try to attack your opponent to get a melee attack, which is known as one that hits an opponent as soon as they end the recovery. But suddenly you get grabbed. This also happens when you do an air reset. You may think to yourself, that was weird. I could have sworn I had a good timing there. How did I get grabbed? Then you proceed to go into the training mode and set the dummy to perform a grab as the reversal attack, and you make sure that the reversal message appears. Again, you do the knockdown or the air reset you did in the previous match, and you go for a melee attack again. Weirdly enough, you get grabbed yet again. You try again, and that time you mash for your life to get a melee. But you can guess what happens next. Something is happening, right? You see, in fighting games, throws behave differently from each other. Sometimes you have to do a specific command to do them, meaning that they have some sort of startup and whiff animation, and sometimes, like in KOF or in Guilty Gear Xrd or Glossary, they are performed by inputting forward or back plus a specific attack button. In the case of KOF, while that hasn't changed completely, the way they behave on defense have changed, and they have made kind of an impact on how the game is played. For some people, this is a good change. For others, this has affected even the legacy on KOF gameplay in a horrible way, causing a big discourse in the community and many left wondering if this has been the right approach for 15. It has gotten to the point that SNK has recently added a new mechanic called Advanced Strike, and given the explanation they gave in its announcement, you could tell that they made this to deal with the situation at hand. In this video, I intend to give a brief explanation on how KOF 15's throw mechanic works and compare it to other games, including older installments of KOF. With it, I'll try my best to explain why this has caused a bit of a controversy in the community and why they even went as far to add a mechanic in this rather stage late of the game and the consequences of it. Be aware that I am not here to give an opinion on it, as I'll do my best to keep this video more objective rather than as subjective. A throw or a grab is usually a mechanic of a game that allows players to open up blocking opponents. This is normally because throws break through the opponent's guard, at least when blocking, in an effort to deal some damage and start putting the well-known strike throw mix-up. If they block, then go for a throw. If they don't, then go for a strike attack. Simple, right? You should keep in mind, however, that throws work differently in every game, and what I mean by that is not only the way they are performed, but also the properties of it. In fighting games, there's been multiple ways throws are designed, as each game has different other mechanics that affect it. It is not always just a matter of doing a strike throw mix-up. Take for example Tekken 8. Throws are effective in this game to break an opponent's guard, but it is not the only purpose. For example, the game has armored moves known as power crushes, and throws are effective against this since it breaks armor. Then, a mind game, on top of all the different mind game that the game establishes, emerges. If the opponent wants to continue their offense, knowing that you might press an attack normal, then they will perform a power crush that will armor your attack. But if you did a throw, then it will break the armor and now you have the advantage, in which case the opponent can duck the throw, interrupt it, among other options. It's interesting how a mechanic that is almost universal in fighting games seems to be made for offense, but it has its defensive uses as well, right? I can go on and on about how different fighting games have unique properties in their throws, like Dragon Ball FighterZ Dragon Rush, Mortal Kombat throws that forces opponents to guess which side it was performed in order to break it, among other games. However, to keep this video short, I will mention two types of throws that are, at least in my opinion, the most prevalent that are seen in fighting games. I'm going to name them for the sake of this video as committed throws and non-committed throws. And for this example, I'm going to refer to committed throws in Street Fighter 6 and non-committed throws for Guilty Gear and KOF. In the Street Fighter franchise, normally throws are performed by inputting light punch and light kick at the same time. And of course, you can assign a button to do this for you. When you do so, the following sequence will happen. Your character will perform a starting animation that is dedicated specifically for a throw. Then three things can happen. 1. Either your throw connects, in which an animation will be shown in which the opponent will be knocked down, and the properties of it can vary depending on the character and the side of your throw, like for example, the distance between you and the opponent after the throw is performed, among other variables. 2. Your throw whiffs, in which your character will perform an animation and maybe also a dedicated voice line that shows that you weren't in the right place to throw it, For 3, your opponent breaks the throw, in which there will be an animation and some distance will be made between you and the opponent, generally indicating that neutral is reset. To break this type of throw normally means that you also have to press the throw command at the same time a throw is registered, and each game has its own window to take the throw. I am aware that in other games, like for example Tekken or Mortal Kombat, throws are tagged differently, but I want to keep using Street Fighter for the sake of brevity. What we can conclude here is that when you press the throw input, it means that essentially you are sort of committing to it, meaning that you want the throw to come out or you want to break an incoming throw. There are situations, however, in which you can cover both the strike and the throw at the same time, like for example the delay tech option select. Here, using the Infil fighting game Glossary, we can see an example of it, in which the player blocks for a bit, after a few frames they input a throw and block again. If the opponent went for a strike attack, then the player would block it, but if he went for a throw, then the player would tech the throw. This of course has some risks, like for example, if the opponent delays his timing a bit or spaces themselves enough. It will cause the throw to whiff and hence allowing the opponent to punish the player. This is known as a shield. While this can also happen for non-committed throws, technically speaking, and don't worry, I'll get to them into a second, it's not exactly the same for committed throws. You are still kind of committing for a throw, as you will sort of force your character to perform a throw animation, and you're also committing in the sense of both knowing what will happen if it hits or if it whiffs. Here's what changes in non-committed throws, however. Non-committed throws are usually performed by doing a heavy attack plus a direction. From this you might be wondering, is it every time I do a direction and a heavy attack? Can I not do a heavy attack plus a direction and all I want is a strike attack instead of a throw? Well, of course, in order to trigger it, you have to be close to the opponent. And each game, and sometimes even characters, have different ranges for it to trigger. And what if you're close but you just want your attack to come out? Well, simply press the attack button without any direction. And to break it, simply press your heavy button plus a direction as well, and it doesn't have to be the same direction. So from this we can see that in comparison to committed throws, there is no animation dedicated for the startup nor for the whiff of the throw. Why? Well, because if we are not in range for the throw to trigger, then the attack button that we did will come out instead. So now if we compare the throw sequence to committed throws, we will still have an animation if a throw registers, and two things will change. One, the startup animation for our throw is now the startup animation for the attack that we used, and two, if it whiffs, we also will get the animation of the normal used, meaning the attack normal, of course. In games like in Guilty Gear Xrd, we have what is known as the throw OS, in which the throw input is made but with an additional, preferably lighter button. What this causes is that now throws are safer to use both in defense and in offense, since if the throw doesn't register or if it just whiffs, then the player will use the light button to come out instead, which is usually faster and safer than the heavy button, in this case being heavy slash, which of course is riskier since it tends to have higher recovery, and this of course depends on the character. Of course, it is probably more frustrating for players for this to be used in defense. Let's say the attacker is doing his basic pressure and suddenly wants to delay their attacks, do a jump, maybe a throw or whatever, and the defender simply press forward or back plus an attack button, and even though he didn't mean to interrupt the attacker, or rather thought a throw was incoming, he won anyway since the attack button came out, and if the game they were playing was one with committed throws, the throw would have whiffed and the attacker could have gotten a punish. Even still, we can't exactly say it's more powerful since again, it depends on the game. For example, in Street Fighter 6, while you are committed to do a throw, the opponent can be grabbed on wake up, which allows for what is known as a throw loop. This forces the defenders to take a guess with both the strike and the throw in mind. So either the opponent actually succeeds on the guess and either gets hit by a throw, or get hit by a melee normal that can transform into a full combo. With of course the alternative of a reversal attack to stop both options, but it's still risky. In some games with non-committed throws, however, there's something called throw protection, in which after your recovery, there's a few frames where you cannot get grabbed, which is of course weaker for the offender since for a few frames, one of these offensive options is completely shut down and is demanded that they play around it. As you can tell, throws in the KOF series work as non-committed ones. More exactly, you have to press a heavy normal plus a direction. If you press the heavy punch, this will cause a forward throw, and if you press the heavy kick button, then back throw will be performed. Of course, since you don't have to guess which direction the throw will be performed, this essentially means that holding back is your best bet to tech it, because if the opponent wasn't close enough to be thrown, then you will enter block or you will have your heavy button come out. Simple, right? Now that you know how to perform grabs and how to tech them in KOF, it is important to understand why in KOF 15 they have become a problem for some people, and for that we must understand how invulnerability works. Let's use KOF 15 for example. I'm going to deal a hard knockdown using Isla. Notice how as soon as my opponent wakes up, if I try to grab him but my heavy button comes out instead. This is because when an opponent is in recovery, whether it be block stun, hit stun, and knockdowns, there's a few frames where they cannot get thrown. This however does not apply to the attacker. What this means is that whenever you get a hard knockdown or an air reset, your opponent has throw invulnerability for a few frames, but the attacker however can be grabbed. This is in the community is known as reversal throw, a name given to when players use a throw as a reversal attack. What this causes is that the defenders have yet another benefit to them thanks to not only the benefits of non-committed throws, but also how they work specifically in KOF 15, because now the option to use throws as a reversal attacks is much stronger. Also keep in mind that in KOF 15 throws are 1 frame startup, making them incredibly fast. This is why before you try to do a melee attack and then proceeded to get grabbed, because 1, you don't have throw invulnerability when the opponent is waking up, and 2, because grabs are incredibly fast. Has this always happened in KOF? Well, not exactly. Let's use KOF 13 for example. In KOF 13, whenever you get a knockdown, the opponent cannot get grabbed, however, the same applies for the attacker, meaning that if the opponent woke up with an attempted grab, then their heavy normal will come out, essentially causing your pressure to be more effective, since now your opponent is forced to either commit to a reversal risky move like a roll or a DP, or blocking your attacks, making also your mix-ups stronger. Now that we talked about how reversal throws work in 15 and why it is different in older KOFs, let's talk about how to deal with them and the implications of each scenario. One of the things that you can do to counter an opponent that is waking up with grab is by simply spacing yourself out just in enough distance for your normals to hit your opponent but far enough for the opponent's grab to not register. This will cause them to actually do a heavy normal instead of a grab, and because this is slower you will proceed to interrupt them and your melee will be successful. There's a few cons to this related to the mix-up department however. Take for example a simple air reset. If you hit an airborne opponent with another air attack known as an air-to-air attack, sometimes if you're high enough, then you can choose to either run under the opponent or keep the same side. But if you space yourself out to evade the grab, then you give the opponent more time to react to your mix-up. Another part related to the mix-ups in these games is in the area of empty lows. An empty low is a mix-up in which a player will perform a jump or another mobility move that puts them in the air, not do an attack in the air but instead perform a low as soon as they are landing, making the opponent stand block since they are expecting the player to hit in the air and then they proceed to get hit by the low instead. In KOF, if after a knockdown you don't space yourself out to avoid the grab after a hard knockdown into an empty low, then the opponent can option select it and grab you as soon as you land, and if you choose to do a jumping attack instead, the opponent will block it. A safe jump is a jumping attack that hits the opponent as soon as they end their recovery and it avoids the risk of getting hit by a reversal attack, including throw, hence the name safe. Now this of course is not only the best option, not only against reversal throw, but against reversals in general. Essentially, there aren't any problems with this option, only that it comes with the sacrifice that the jump will probably be reactable, although there are some cases where characters can do a cross-up mix that's also a safe jump. However, keep in mind that some characters have a more difficult time to perform safe jumps than others. Iori, for example, has tons of ways he can get a hard knockdown into a safe jump, without spending meter and from light attacks. In some other cases, like Robert for example, he is forced to spend meter to even get a safe jump after a combo from a light starter. Jumping can be an effective way to bait opponents to perform a grab in any scenario, not just a reversal. Since you're in the air, the opponent's grab attempt will actually be a heavy attack in which hopefully you will whiff, allowing you to get a full jump in punish. There's a few risks to this, however. One of them is that the opponent can simply not grab and react with an anti-air, effectively countering your bait attempt. Another one is that if the opponent chooses to roll or walk forward, they can run under you, and if you didn't perform an attack that can cross up, then you can get full combo punish on landing. In this game, some moves have a weird property where if you do a normal before the opponent recovers completely, reversal throw won't work. This is very character specific, however, and it's mostly a knowledge check if you have enough experience in the game, but it's still a viable way of baiting. Finally, you can also use an invulnerable move to bait an incoming throw. Of course, this is extremely risky since the invulnerable moves tend to have a big amount of recovery frames that will leave you open for a full combo. There are also some moves that are not completely vulnerable and not throwable. One of the many examples in the game is both Shermie and Orochi Shermie's close heavy kick, where, for a few frames, she cannot get grabbed, making it an excellent tool against not only reversal grabs, but most also about the ones that aren't done as a reversal move. There's also one more answer to this, but don't worry, I'll speak about it later, don't worry.
It's the biggest piece of dog shit.
So great, we now know how to counter KOF15 grabs. But why is it controversial then? Well, it is more so about the implications of reversal grab than the mechanic itself. But let me break it down in a few reasons why this is the case. One of the reasons has to do with how KOF offense used to work, especially after a knockdown or an air recovery. KOF is a franchise where the fundamentals have stayed pretty similar from one game to the other, so it is natural that when something that is common in a franchise is taken off, a sudden amount of controversy appears. As I said before, in older KOFs this wasn't exactly the case. All of these aspects helped the player come to the conclusion that whenever you were in a tight defensive spot in older KOFs, you should have always respected your opponent's offense or you'll eat big damage. That is not to say that in KOF 15 it shouldn't also be respected, it just means that in 15's defense is a lot stronger, and naturally that doesn't sit right with a lot of players that have been playing the franchise for a lot of time. But now let's talk about the more practical implications of reversal throw in 15. They can be either positive or negative, but again, I am not here to give my opinion, I'll leave that up to you. One of the classic setups in KOF is the classic roll 50-50. Where a character gets a hard knockdown and then he proceeds to do a roll in a very ambiguous position where the opponent has to make a hard reaction or guess as to where the player will end, either the right or the left. And if you're wrong, then you get comboed yet again. Naturally, because the opponent can wake up with reversal grab, this either won't give the attacker enough time to space themselves to avoid the grab, or if it does, then the attacker has to take some more time for it, which in turn makes the setup or mix-up weaker as it is more reactable. Another example of this is a classic empty low setup, where after a knockdown a player will perform a hop or a jump, but the opponent can do what I like to call the empty throw OS, where if the attacker does a jumping attack, then the defender will block it, and if the attacker lands and immediately does a low attack, then the defender will throw it. Again, of course the attacker can do the solutions I listed earlier, but again, either those come with a risk or they make the mix-up weaker. And this is one of many examples, but this is just to show that reversal grab is effective at neutralizing certain offensive setups that used to be possible before, or at least they were harder to deal with. Of course, each fighting game works differently, both in defense and in offense, but sometimes there are rules that are a bit general for fighting games, but they can change. Normally, when you put your opponent in a knockdown state, you either go for an attack as soon as they wake up, and this is known as a meaty, or you block for a bit, and if you expect a reversal and probably an invulnerable move which will put the opponent in a vulnerable state, in which case you can punish accordingly and repeat the process. In this game, however, you also have to take into account reversal throw, meaning that essentially you have to also learn how to do a properly spaced meaty, otherwise you can get grabbed. Since beginners typically come from other fighting games, they are used for the first rule I mentioned and wonder why whenever they get a knockdown they proceed to get grabbed, as the example I mentioned at the beginning of this video. I remember how once in my streams I was explaining what reversal grab is, and then one of my viewers said, "Oh, that's why I keep getting grabbed," even though he had considerable time in fighting games and also in KOF 15. But the game doesn't really explain this to you. You have to either experience it or hear someone else talk about it. Of course, a reversal move is done after a player is out of recovery, typically when the attacker left them in that state. So this mechanic, of course, makes the defender stronger, as it makes the attacker have to think more about how they execute their offense. This also makes the other defensive mechanics in the game stronger, especially roll and other invulnerable attacks, since now the attacker will tend to space themselves out to avoid reversal grab, which makes the roll in the opposite direction stronger, as there's now more space to be made between you and the opponent. And also this makes roll stronger because of advanced strike, but I'll get to that in a bit. This in turn means that characters that get access to safe jumps are stronger, since that also beats reversal throws, rolls, and invulnerable moves. Fighting games are about a lot of things, but one important aspect of them, at least in my opinion, is risk and reward management. Sure, we can play a lot against one person, but even still we might not know what are they going to do exactly. Are they going to jump? Will they DP? Or maybe block on wake up? Will they roll? Etc. To manage the unpredictability of fighting games, it is important to manage what risk are you going to take, and you are the one that will come to the conclusion if said risks are worth it or not. Of course, the more defensive tools your opponent has, the riskier it is to execute an offense on your opponent. Because this mechanic exists alongside some other aspects of the game, like dashing having an increased amount of recovery, walking speed being heavily reduced, and combos that start with overheads or command grabs are highly scaled in terms of damage, this results in offense being riskier unless your character has access to a safe jump. Because of this, players now tend to reset neutral more often as they want to prevent taking risk, and it makes the game more focused in neutral and a slower paced game. On January 26, 2024, SNK announced a new mechanic that will be added later to the game called Advanced Strike. If you see the trailer, you will get to the conclusion that the goal was to 1. Have a direct counter to throws in the game. Seriously, just take a shot every time they mention the throw mechanic in the game and let me know how you end up afterwards. And 2. Make the game more aggressive overall. Of course, SNK knew that part of the community wasn't happy with the state of the game, at least compared to the old ones as I mentioned before. You might say that they could have just removed the throw changes in the game altogether, but my theory is that they made this mechanic to keep up with players interested and to somewhat keep up with other modern games, similar to something like the hit mechanic in Tekken, but that's just a theory though. So, how does this new mechanic work? Essentially, for half a bar, a player can do a move that has an animation similar to a blowback attack or a shatter strike, but is much slower. If this move hits the opponent, then it will send them flying away for a knockdown, and it is also plus and block. And also, if the opponent either gets hit by it or blocks it, then it will refund that bar to the player that used the mechanic. It should be also noted that the move has armor frames, and it can be effective to counter mashing opponents or reversal invulnerable moves, like a DP for example. However, here's the interesting part. If the defender tries to throw the opponent, either by doing a normal or a command throw, it will pause the game briefly and a unique sound effect will come up, letting the player know that it countered the throw attempt successfully. After that, the move will also cause a crumble that will give the user an opportunity to start a combo similar to Shatter Strike. Perfect then. Now the game is more aggressive and we managed to beat the grab incidents now, right? Well, yes and no. Allow me to explain. The startup animation for this move is 28 frames, which makes it really reactable by the defender to actually either roll or jump and punish on reaction with a full combo, which makes it actually really risky to use. Jumps, however, can be dangerous on defense against some characters, like both Shermies, because their blowback attacks are effective to anti-air opponents. Sometimes, even if you do try to do an advanced strike to bait a throw, an opponent can grab you on the first 3 or 4 frames, I think. So for example, if you try to do an empty advanced strike after a hop or a jump, an opponent can still do the empty throw OS to counter your attempt, meaning that now the opponent has now gained the advantage, and now because your move didn't register, then you lost half a bar. Damage scaling is huge after actually hitting your advanced strike with a combo, so even if you do end up countering a throw attempt, the following combo will not do as much damage as if you hit it with a normal attack or even with a shatter strike. There is a series of inputs that allow you to do an option select against an advanced strike defensively. I will leave it in the description below. If you went for an armor hit, then your opponent will block it. And if you went for a throw, then the opponent will take it, and if you go for an advanced strike, then light punch will come out. After that, the opponent will hit the armor frames on their move, but even after, they will likely have time to even block your advanced strike attempt. The controversy regarding throws in KOF15 has been massive due to how it massively changed the system and how the game is played as a whole compared to the older KOFs. Some people do like the game for what it is and the heavy emphasis on neutral, while some other people think that the game has become too defensive and sometimes even boring to both play and watch. SNK has showed that they are even aware of this by introducing a new mechanic that at least attempted to solve it. But what do you think? Do you think the throw system is perfectly fine, or do you have some issues with it? Let me know. And for those who have been playing the franchise since before 15, do you like the changes or would you rather see the old system brought back? Let me know. See you in the next one.